Welcome back to another Vinyl Friday where I go through my record collection in alphabetical order, like big nerd, and talk about what I love about my albums. We've reached a very, very sad day today because this is the last Beatles album that I own. I would own more, obviously, because I love the Beatles, but the point where I started collecting records, there's a point in history where records were like $2 a pop because nobody wanted them. Indeed, that's how I got into record collecting, because I couldn't afford CDs when I was 15. And for the price of one CD, I could get 15 records. Even then, these puppies were very expensive and out of my price range. And now, forget about it. So this is the last of my Beatles records. And don't fret, there are solo albums coming out, but as this is alphabetical, your 2 months of Paul McCartney are gonna have to wait for a little bit. But they are coming. And I have some Lennon ones as well, don't worry. I don't have any George ones, so I've got a couple of months to acquire George Harrison album or two. Editing Nancy here. As I've said in the past, everyone forgets Ringo, and I am no exception. I do also have Ringo albums. Fortunately for everyone, I don't have too many Ringo albums. So on that sad note, I thought I'd end on a very polarizing but incredibly bouncy choice. Here we go. This song's hilarious. A thing that makes the song hilarious is the irony behind it. It is so cheerful and so despised, both by Beatles fans, some Beatles fans, and members of the Beatles themselves, because Paul made them play it over and over and over and over and over again because he didn't feel like it was perfect. Now, as a songwriter, I don't think that's fair on your bandmates. It seems like making your bandmates workshop a song with you and you're still unhappy with it is a clear indication that your song isn't good enough yet and you should go away and work on it some more by yourself. Paul McCartney didn't do this, and as a result, made his bandmates hate him a little bit. They were a bit fractious anyway. They were a demoralized group at that point in time. As I understand it, it was pretty terrible. On that note, I was listening to the Escher demos recently. The Beatles got together after they finished at Rishikesh. They went to George's house. They had a tape recorder and they recorded all of these demos that they had written while they were in India. Most of those songs would end up on the White Album. A lot of Beatles fans actually prefer it to the White Album. I think in part because they sound so relaxed and cheerful on the Escher demos, and we all know what happened during the White Album recording sessions. If I remember correctly, and I will be corrected if I don't remember correctly, that was where George Martin walked out because the energy was just so oppressive in the recording studio. As I mentioned in a prior episode, I had been recently reading Here, There, and Everywhere by recording engineer Jeff Emmerich. And this is what he had to say about that period. Storytime correspondent, over to you.
Okay, so it's the day that we're recording Hey Bulldog. It's the last thing that they record before they go off to India. Here's what Jeff Emmerich has to say about that. The vibe that day was great. All four Beatles were in an exceptionally good mood because they knew they would be heading to India in a matter of days. Despite the fact that there was a film crew underfoot, because there's a fantastic video for Hey Bulldog, they filmed it. And then he says, with the trip to India looming, this was to be the last time I saw the group before the start of what would be the miserable, tension-filled White Album sessions. The storm clouds were gathering off in the distance. That's the end of the chapter. The next chapter begins, I'd had enough. It's called The Day I Quit. So much had changed since I'd last seen the Beatles just a few months previously. They had come back from their trip to India completely different people. They had once been fastidious and fashionable. Now they were scruffy and unkempt. They had once been witty and full of humor, now they were solemn and prickly. They had once been bonded together as lifelong friends, now they resented one another's company. They had once been light-hearted and fun to be around, now they were angry. On that somber note, back to you.
So by the sounds of it, everything was fine at the end of 1967, and it was fine at the very beginning of 1968, and then it all went to custard, and I don't understand why. If you have any theories, I would love to hear them, because it's a thing that just puzzles me in my life. Fortunately, I don't think that it's that bad a song to begin with, and that is why I have chosen it today. So given all of that background, let's begin at the beginning. Here is the first thing that I love about this song. By the time they got to this take, John Lennon was thoroughly fed up with this song, and from what I can tell, he didn't have a lot of patience to begin with, so it was a low threshold. And so the sort of iconic beginning of the song is actually extremely passive-aggressive. He is just banging on the piano as hard as he possibly can because He is done. Second thing after that is the claps and the intro. Here we go. Feel free to play along at home. This song was on a compilation record called Beatles Rarities? Essential Beatles? I can't remember the name of the compilation album. It's not really relevant. This song was on it, and that record was what introduced me to the Beatles and what made me fall in love with them. I was 5 at the time. I don't know if Dulux exists outside of New Zealand or even maybe the UK, but it's a paint store. Their mascot is this like fluffy English sheepdog, and oddly enough, Paul had a fluffy English sheepdog. I didn't know that at the time though. Shout out to Martha. I always thought this line here was Desmond takes a trolley to the Dulux store. Desmond takes a trolley to the Dulux store. No, for some reason, my 5-year-old brain thought that it was completely logical that you could buy a 20-carat golden ring from the Dulux store. Sure. Why not? Okay, so I just finished the episode and then realized that I wasn't recording, which is a rookie move, I will admit. This was one of the first Beatles songs I'd ever heard. As an adult who now knows what the background of the song was, I find it all the more delightful. There are all of these Lennonisms sprinkled throughout the song that I had assumed were because John Lennon thought the song was a lot of fun, when in reality it was because he hated the thing with all of his being. Ironically, John Lennon hating this song formed a large part of why I like this song. So let's quickly go through and I'll show you some of the things that I'm talking about. First, he's belting the chorus. And again, that made me feel like he really liked the song. It's a passive-aggressive move. So it sounds like they're having a jolly good time, but actually he's just taking the piss the whole time. The last couple of points I'd like to make are just a couple of musical notes. Notes. In his heart, Paul McCartney knew that this song was kind of a joke. And maybe if he'd leaned into this song being kind of a joke, he would have been a lot more relaxed about it. Instead, he tortured his poor bandmates in trying to legitimize what was ultimately a bit of a silly song. However, I think that the saxophone parts are legitimately very good. So there are a couple of parts that I'd like to point out. There's this little one. In the first time, it's just the harmonized saxophones. The second time, there's this. I like that. I think that's very cool because there are a lot of choruses in this song. So you got to do something different with them so that they don't all sound the same. One of the things that they did to make sure that they don't all sound the same is they introduced this little saxophone part. I don't play the saxophone. I don't have a saxophone, but I do make experimental musical instruments. So I'm going to play along with this on one of my experimental musical instruments, which I call an ullophone. It's essentially a balloon membrane stretched over the top of a butchered school recorder. So here you go. You're welcome, or I'm sorry, depending on your inclination. This is the saxophone / ullophone part of Obladi Oblada. I hope you enjoyed that. One last little point about Obladi Oblada. Just this delightful little piano part. It's lightweight, it's kind of throwaway, but it really adds something to the song. There have to be things that generate interest in this song, because while there's a story being told, it's not a very interesting story. So, they've got all these little musical things that they're adding in. Honestly, one of the things that generates interest, as I said before, was John Lennon being silly throughout the song. I think without that, it might be kind of sad. It's not a great song. It feels like a sacrilegious thing to say on my last Beatles Final Friday, but it is not their strongest song, and all of John Lennon's silliness makes it a really enjoyable song. So there's that. There are the saxophone parts, which there are more of as the song progresses. There's Paul McCartney's harmony in the last verse. Desmond and Molly Jones. And then this. Those are some things that keep the song pumping along. Otherwise, again, it would be a mediocre song and it would go on for far too long. However, thankfully, that didn't happen, and so the song is light and poppy and bright and cheerful. So this seems like a nice way to end this several months long journey through my somewhat meager Beatles record collection. You know, just subtle hint, if anyone wanted to send me a Beatles record, I would absolutely do more Vinyl Fridays on Beatles records. Just putting it out there. Obviously, I've got other great records. At least I think they're great. I love them. We're still only part of the way through B, so as much as I've enjoyed doing Beatles on Vinyl Friday, I am also really looking forward to some of the other ones that are coming up. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope that you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Obladi Oblada.